Hello, my friends. There is a hunter in this forest, and he wants to kill me. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. Sorry for the delay. A lot has happened since my first post. My phone was dead, too, so I couldn't share anything if I'd wanted to. But, to be honest, I kind of forgot about my first post, with all that's been going on. Anyways, back to when we tried to escape. We left the house without issue. There are two roads that go out of my town, one went south, and the other north. Since we were headed to Canada, we took the north road, through long stretches of isolated forest. I was pretty nervous, to say the least. No one I knew had gotten out of town alive. Worse, there was that friend that had texted me, showing that our monster was just one of many and that they were beginning to spread. My dad had made up his mind, though, and convinced me of the same. We couldn't have stayed. It would have been like waiting for a death sentence. Better to die trying to escape, which, if you haven't figured it out by now, worked. We had our first run-in with a monster part way down the northbound road. The thing was fast, we were driving along without issue, and then the car suddenly exploded in front of us, as if we'd hit something. Which we did. I was too dazed at first to notice, and so was my dad, but we noticed the bashed-in hood of the car after a few seconds. There was fur sticking out of one of our headlights, which had broken. Other than that, nothing suggested the monster. Somehow, we did not jump to that conclusion at first. My dad figured he'd just missed a deer on the road. It happens all the time. And the fur actually looked like deer fur, somehow. It was a dark tan, about the length of a phone. Our car still worked, so we kept driving. That was a mistake. About a minute after the accident, I heard the sound of tires being slashed. Don't ask me how that happened while we were moving. I don't know. My dad claims he didn't even notice until the car began skidding to a stop. When we did stop, my dad cursed. He at first thought that the initial accident had screwed something up until I told him what I'd heard. That's when he balked. We both knew that the monster had probably been responsible. Sure enough, it emerged from the nearby trees, and it was fast. Like, supernaturally fast. I swear that, in less than a second, it covered 100 feet between us and the woods. Then it was at the car, scrabbling with its claws at my window in the back. It was the first time I'd gotten a good look at the thing. It had a hunched back, kind of like a werewolf, and claws the size of a hand. The fur was indeed the same shade as that of a deer. Worst was its black, beady eyes, like the eyes of any predator you see in movies. Somehow, it couldn't break through the window. The monster even tried gnawing its way in with its rows of shark-like teeth. I could only watch in horror as it slobbered on the car. My dad snapped me out of it. "Get the gun!" he yelled at me. I, for some reason, asked him which one. "Any," he said. So I grabbed the first one I could from the trunk. Thankfully, it was a hatchback. I came up with the shotgun, which was a relief. The sniper would not have been ideal in that situation. My dad had shown me how to fire the guns before we left. With the exception of the sniper, he'd said that there was no way I could learn enough in a few minutes. Besides, if we were in a position to use it, he'd have time to grab it himself and line up a shot. I'd never gone hunting with him, never really had an interest in guns until now, but I paid attention to every detail he showed me. I had known our lives might depend on it as they did then. I brought the already loaded shotgun up and flicked off the safety, putting the stock up against my shoulder. for a moment. I was too afraid to shoot. The monster was moving to the passenger window as if that would provide a better entrance. My dad yelled at me to shoot again, and I finally did, wincing as the gun boomed in such an enclosed space. In hindsight, while we didn't have a choice, it was not the smartest thing to do. There could have been shrapnel, especially because my shot caught the upper part of the window, where it bordered the metal of the car. But we got lucky. The monster howled, and I could see it pouring red blood onto the ground. It ran back into their woods as fast as it had come. I sat there with a gun, waiting for the longest few minutes after my life. My dad finally told me to lower the gun. There were no more monsters coming. I relented, turning the safety back on and putting the gun on the back seat. "Well, no," my dad said. "What?" "The car." It took me a moment, but I realized what he was saying. The car was now borderline totaled. In addition to the busted front end, the tires were now slashed. We only had one spare on the back. We were ballsy enough to get out and check the damage. Both of the rear tires were busted. And I mean it, the rubber was shredded, and the metal was gouged at least half an inch deep. I was amazed that the monster hadn't broken into our car. "We'll have to walk," my dad said grimly. I did not like that idea at all. Yeah, we'd hurt one of the monsters, and nothing was after us at the moment. But I had seen how fast the thing was. If it did decide to come after us out in the open, we would be dead. I doubted I could even pull the trigger faster than the monster ran at us. My dad convinced me to go. "If we stayed in the car," he said, "it would be the same as hiding in our house. We'd be waiting for the inevitable. Worse, we had only brought a few supplies, snacks, some PB&J sandwiches, water, the guns, and a first aid kit. To be fair, that was all we should have needed. The drive up to Canada was not long, only a few hours at most. We couldn't bring supplies with us, either. Neither of us had thought to bring backpacks. Again, the trip wasn't supposed to take long. We figured that any delays would end with us dead. No point in overstocking the car. I suppose that was pretty stupid of us in hindsight. We each took a gun. I kept the shotgun since I knew I could use it. My dad took a 9mm pistol he'd nabbed in what had most likely been an illegal auction. I didn't care now, though, at that time. My mom had criticized him for it. There was plenty of ammo, so we stuffed our pants and coat pockets. We did not bring any food or water. My dad knew there was a convenience store 4 miles away, and more supplies would have bogged us down. The guns and ammo were already enough to carry. It took the better part of 2 hours to walk there. For most of that walk, I expected to die. My hands shook so hard that I dropped the shotgun twice. Thank God I'd remembered to turn on the safety before. I would have blown one of us apart otherwise. I even fingered the trigger when I saw movement at one point. It had been a squirrel, and I didn't care about shooting the thing, but I did worry about attracting the monster with noise. I knew that my dad had been right, that there was no point hiding inside the car, but I wanted to run back there after a few minutes. Starving had more appeal than being torn apart by a monster. We made it without issue. By the time we walked into that store, I was dead tired. My anxiety had worn off, and I'd already been running on fumes. The first thing I did was set my shotgun down and curl up in a waiting chair in the back. We stayed there for 3 days. Neither of us was eager to leave. There were lots of non-perishables in the store. The doors could be double-bolted, and there was even a microwave in the back. Plus, There was a cellar with an entrance from the inside, which went down about 30 feet into the ground. We were as safe there as we had been at our own home. Mostly, I think we were waiting. There were no more sightings of a monster, but with the half-dozen windows and glass door in the place, we expected a monster to at least come sniffing. Nothing bothered us. There were no people, either, which bothered me. Since that road was one of two going out of our town, it usually had a lot of traffic. We did not spot a single car in our time at the store. There weren't even any in the small parking lot unless you count the rusted Volkswagen Beetle frame sitting on the grass. That thing had been there since my dad was a kid, no one had bothered to tow it, and it kind of became a novelty over time. We took our time figuring out what to do. My dad and I knew that whatever we decided next would determine whether we made it out alive. We were in no rush, either, being in a store stocked with food, water, and heat. There was even a cellar we could have retreated to, had a monster tried to break in, and we even found some sleeping bags down there. Our first idea came from me, and it pretty much shot down immediately. I thought we should call someone for help, not the police since they all went missing before, but a friend or someone else nearby. My dad pointed out that no one would want to come to pick us up, with the monsters roaming around. And they probably couldn't. We suspected that the government was keeping everyone out. They hadn't kept us from leaving, true, but they probably couldn't. Staying in that town would have been a death sentence. Not to mention that our phones were dead. Neither of us had thought to bring chargers. If we'd spent a few hours on the road as planned, we wouldn't have needed them and would have just bought some in Canada. That decision was starting to look bad, along with the many other things we'd neglected. My dad thought for a while that we could wait for a car to drive down the road and that we could signal it with our guns. Not a terrible idea, really, and a lot better than mine. Just one problem. There were still no cars, even after 2 days of waiting. No signs of life, either, which was good, because we didn't see the monster, but it was also strange. There were usually animals roaming the woods. We settled on a new plan when it became clear cars weren't coming. I suppose we could have been more patient. It didn't make sense to wait, though, not with the one monster around and the possibility of more trying to break in. Our situation had become no different than before when we decided to leave home. We would either leave or stay put and die. My dad knew that the PD was 10 miles or so down the road. He had been very hesitant to consider walking, and for good reason. 10 miles would take hours to cover. Plenty of time for a monster to ambush us, which would likely end in our deaths. I also suspected that, during our walk to the store, we had not gotten lucky at all. The monster I'd shot was probably the only one in the area. It would not have come after us so soon after being attacked. But 3 days had passed, and it might have shaken off its hesitation at that point. It wasn't much of a choice, really. We had nowhere else to go, and the store was like a ticking time bomb. My dad suggested at one point that maybe I'd killed the monster, and that was why it hadn't bothered us. I doubted that seriously. I also knew that there were more monsters, a lot more, in the nearby town. The one my friend had texted me from. If they decided to come near us, we were probably screwed. So, early that afternoon, we decided to leave. There were no backpacks in the store, either, and we didn't want to lug grocery bags around with our guns to carry. It wouldn't be too long, we figured, and our problems would be resolved in one way or another at the PD. If someone was alive or there were some means of escape, we'd take it. If not, well, the nearest town was still 60 miles away, too far to bother walking. And there were monsters there. The PD would have to help us in some way. If it didn't, then we really were screwed, and we'd just wait it out in the store, praying desperately for a rescue of some sort. Or we'd just kill ourselves before that happened. That walk was even worse than the one from before when we'd left our ruined car behind. As I said, I'd suspected the monster had left us alone that first day because of its injury. There was no reason it wouldn't come back now. Without the safety of our car, we would have no chance against it, not with how fast it moved. I tried not to think these things as we walked, but it was impossible not to. Even when we saw the building appear in the distance, my heart was still racing. I thought I'd felt stress during finals week. That was a joke compared to this. Anything I'd experienced could not compare to the anxiety I felt out there. If you've ever feared for your life, for any reason, you know what I mean. Fortunately, nothing happened. We made it to the building in one piece, without having seen a hint of a monster. I was inclined to believe that, just maybe, the monsters were all gone until my dad pointed out that there was still no one on the road. People would have returned to our town if it was safe. The PD was not large. It had a waiting area, a few jail cells, 3 offices, and a break room. That was it. So it did not take us long to search the place and determine that no one was around. We were not surprised. We'd heard the reports when all of this shit started, that there had been missing police officers in the area. They were all dead by then, I was sure of it. The place had been left alone for a long time. Whoever had last left it had left it clean, too. There was no food sitting out in the break room, no waste in the trash cans, no papers scattered on desks. All the lights had been turned off, too. It was like a museum. I would have almost preferred to see some signs of a chaotic departure, or bloodstains to suggest a fight had occurred. There was nothing. The emptiness did nothing to calm my nerves. My dad remained stoic, probably to comfort me. He must have been scared like I was, though, because anyone would have been. Still, he didn't shy away from anything we did, and he always made sure I was eating enough, even when we'd spent time in the store. He was frustrated by our search, to say the least. He knocked over a computer monitor in the waiting area and shattered it, throwing curses at the walls. That wasn't the end of it, either. He went on to break the water dispenser, throw a chair at the wall, rip up magazines by the front door. I finally got him to calm down when I said that the monster might hear all the noise. A bullshit thing to say, I know, because wouldn't the monster have heard us before? And, while it had looked scary as hell, it hadn't seemed supernatural or anything. Besides its speed, that was. My dad went out the back entrance, toward the parking lot. He figured it was worth checking since we'd walked all that way to get here. It paid off. There was a police car in the lot, and it had its keys in the ignition. Problem was, the seat was covered in blood. I thought I was going to throw up looking at it. Somehow, I kept my food down and went back. There had been rolls of paper towels in the break room. I grabbed one of them to bring back out. The seat took a while to clean off. My dad insisted it was unnecessary, since he would be the one driving, and he didn't care. But I did. I didn't want his clothes to get soaked with blood, because anyone we saw across the border would get very suspicious. He relented at that thought. We did clean it, though. We realized, of course, that there would be questions at the border regardless. We had the audacity to bring our passports, but the police car clearly had our town name written on it, and we were not police officers. My dad said we'd figure it out when we got there, that it wasn't worth worrying about when there were more pressing matters at hand. He did not know how true that statement would become. Before we could get in, there was a rustling noise behind us. I froze, but my dad spun immediately, both hands on his pistol. I saw him turn off his safety, but that was as far as he got. The monster was on him a millisecond later. I could not see anything beneath the monster's painting flesh. Its head was bent over my dad like a starving dog. I probably waited too long to shoot it, but I did. I caught it in the shoulder, and it howled as it had earlier. I noted absent-mindedly that it was the same monster, too. There was a crusted-over wound on its side, exactly where I'd shot it from the car. It backed off. My dad stumbled to his feet. He was covered in blood and slobber. I couldn't tell if he was all right, and I didn't have time. The monster came after me next. To say that it was terrifying does not do it justice. Having the thing bowl me over, then stand on top of me, slobbering like a beast, leaning its head close to mine, feeling its hot breath on my face, it was too much. I couldn't move, looking at the thing. I doubt I could have moved regardless, since it had my arms pinned beneath its weight. It was heavier than it looked, and it didn't look like a lightweight. I thought my bones were going to break beneath the thing. It was squeezing the air out of my lungs, too, which didn't help. For some reason, it did not go after me like it did my dad. It spent half a second observing me with a sort of withdrawn intelligence. Its eyes shifted over my face, eager but furtive, looking at the gun still in my hand. I'm not sure if it made the connection between its wound and the gun, but I would have bet it did. I heard several gunshots. The monster flinched, then fell onto its side. Blood was pouring out of its head. I stared at it in shock from my place on the ground. It returned my gaze with a lifeless stare. My dad was okay, somehow. He had a few cuts and bruises, nothing serious. I was worried about an infection. My dad said that it was the least of our concerns. We just had to get the fuck out of there. As for me, I was just shaken up. I was also covered in the monster's slobber, which did make me throw up this time. Or maybe the sight of the monster made me do that, lying in a pool of its own blood. We went into the bathroom to wash up, and we went back to the car. My dad did not waste any time, even though we were tired. He floored the gas and set off on the road. We made it to the border without any other encounters. I think we relaxed once we saw cars on the road again. I know I did. My dad, as unreadable as he had been before, at least let up on the gas pedal. The last thing we needed was a speeding ticket. The guys at the border didn't question us or even mention that we were in a police car. They just looked at our passports and let us go. Maybe they thought we were officers off duty, or they had seen other police come through before. Whatever the case, I was happy to avoid trouble. We're now living in the Toronto metro area. My dad had a lot of money saved up from his store, and I'm starting up college again, so I should be able to work soon. He also found a part-time job as a senior manager at a local chain. I guess they were impressed by his resume, though it did not make any mention of the monsters. In fact, the monsters haven't even made the news up here. I still don't know how our government kept it a secret. We still can't post about it, though. My previous post got deleted when I mentioned our town's name. For some reason, though, they did not delete my account. Maybe because my first post stayed up. As far as I know, the monsters haven't left our state. We've called other friends that live there, and they know nothing about it. My other friend, the one that texted me before we left, has not responded. I fear the worst for him. It'll be hard, adjusting to life in a new country. A new environment, for that matter. We've lived in small towns our whole lives. The suburbs aren't that busy, but there are still more people than we're used to. And my college is way bigger than the one I used to attend. It's also been hard living without Mom. I don't really need to elaborate on that. Most of you reading this have probably lost someone close, and you know how it is. For what it's worth, I think my dad and I have taken it well. Although we're still sad about what happened, my dad and I are happy now, I think. We'll actually have a chance to live again. After spending over a month in hell. We deserve it.